Hey traders, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk about the Ashford Hospitality Trust, ticker symbol AHT. Now, it's been a little while since my last update video on this stock, and since that video happened, not a lot of positive to report on the stock. We've seen pretty bad price action and also some negative news come out. So I'm going to update you guys on that and how it's going to affect our price targets moving forward. After that, as always, I'm going to break down the charts, taking a look at key levels, key indicators, and more, so we know how to best play this stock moving forward. So without any further ado, leave a thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's get started. So since we last talked, we did see a major piece of news come out regarding dilution for this stock. That happened a couple of days ago. We see that the Ashford Hospitality Trust entered into an agreement with 7-Nuts where they're going to be able to sell up to 40 million shares over the next few years. So just another one of these filings, very similar to the Keystone filing in the beginning of May, where Ashford Hospitality Trust is clearly, having a debt issue and they are doing their best to repay this debt. And this is just kind of another move that they seem to be making to set themselves up so that they can clear some of that debt. But now let's go into price targets. I'm going to first just recap what the old price targets were and how we came to that, just in case you're new to these videos. And then I'm going to update it and give you guys new price targets. One's going to be kind of a realistic price target, and one's going to be more of an optimistic price target. If everything goes right for the stock, where do I see it ending up? But starting with the old price targets. So when I was making these price targets about a month ago, the total float on AHT was about 130 million. And they also already had that Keystone filing happen where there could be an additional 30 million shares diluted. And at that time, my price target was 730 to 770. So in order to get to that price target, I did assume that AHT would ultimately dilute those 30 million Keystone shares, bringing the total float to 160 million. The reason I assume that is just because AHT does have that big debt problem and does have the propensity to dilute shares. So that would compare to a float of 32 million in the second half of 2019. And that's kind of where I was basing off price targets, because AHT was trading between $20 to $35 in the second half of 2019 when that float was around 32 million. So I would divide then 160 million by 32 million, which is about 5. And then I divided the $35 2019 high by 5 to figure out the dilution adjusted high for current times. And so that was at $7, meaning that this $35 that we saw back in 2019 is roughly equivalent to $7 today, or at least a month ago when I was making this price target. However, on top of that, I did assume a 5 to 10% increase based off of our bullish thesis that there's a giant travel demand boom, and that brought my final target price to 730 to 770. We also saw that Zach Moore's price target of $10, and I also covered it in an earlier video. And in order to get to that level, I assumed AHT would not dilute those 30 million Keystone shares, at least in the short term, where we get that run up to $10. So that would keep the float at 130 million shares. So dividing that by the pre-COVID float of 32 million, you get around a 4-time float increase. So then you divide that $35 2019 high by 4 to figure out the dilution adjusted high. And so that comes out to 875, meaning that, if that 30 million Keystone share doesn't get diluted, well, then 875 essentially represents that $35 high that we saw in 2019. In addition, I assumed a 15% increase based off of both our bullish thesis of the travel demand boom and also the momentum of the stock. And that brought our final price target to $10. So at that time, $10 made sense. And also this 730 to 770 definitely made a lot of sense on a fundamental, realistic level. However, some things have changed since, we made those price targets. The first thing and foremost, we've seen just that the overall float on AHT has increased. They continue to kind of dilute shares in order to raise capital. They are converting their preferred stock into common stock. And so right now we see that the total float sits at 190 million shares. And on top of that, there's both the Keystone filing, which could bring an additional 30 million shares, and also the 7-Nuts filing that could bring an additional 40 million shares. So in order to figure out my new realistic price target, I'm just assuming that both dilutions happen. And that means that the total float is going to be around 260 million if you add this 190 million plus 30 million plus 40 million. So compared to that 2019 pre-COVID level, or pre-COVID float rather, the 260 million divided by 32 million means is around 8, which means that the float is around 8 times higher than it was prior to 2019 when it reached a pre-COVID high of $35. And so dividing 35 by 8 gives you about $4.37, which is the dilution adjusted high, meaning that if AHT is going to dilute both of these shares in full, well, then 437 represents those $35 highs that we saw back in 2019. However, in addition, we do assume a 5 to 10% increase based on our bullish thesis that, there is that travel demand boom and that AHT is about to have some of its best months in history. And so that brings the new realistic price target to 460 to 481. However, also I did make an optimistic price target. This is more of maybe even a short-term price target. And so in order to get there, we're going to assume both dilutions do not happen in the short term. So that means that the total float remains around where it currently is, which is 190 million. 190 million divided by 32 million is around 6, meaning that the float right now is around 6 times higher than pre-COVID 2019 levels. So $35 divided by 6 is equal to $5.83. That is the dilution adjusted high. In addition, we can assume a 15% increase based on our bullish thesis and momentum, bringing our new optimistic kind of shorter term price target to $6.70. Now, that makes sense to me right now that if everything did go right, we should be able to realize $6.70. And it also does not assume potential for a gamma or short squeeze. So I'm not saying that it can't go higher than that. It definitely can. And if it were to, we would definitely, or we would more than likely see that this gamma or short squeeze potential is in play. And speaking of gamma or short squeeze potential, I just want to cover that with you guys. I don't really see much of a short squeeze potential. We have the short float of 7%, which is something, but it's honestly not, a crazy high number. And yes, this number has not been updated in a while, but I really don't know how much higher it could possibly be, especially, since we've seen over the last 2 weeks this bigger downtrend kind of develop. And so I assume a lot of shorts have covered positions and even made a good profit while doing so. However, there is definitely potential for a gamma squeeze. Taking a look at open calls on the July 16th expiration dates, we do see that there are a ton of open interest in the $5 strikes and the $7.50 strikes for the stock. That's about 100,000 call options currently out of the money on those two strikes. And, that is somewhat coming up soon within the next month, meaning that if we were to see a quick price spike and that the momentum comes back into the stock, well, all of a sudden, all the institutions are going to have to hedge their positions and cover these calls. And as a result, we could see a gamma squeeze, and that could push the stock price even higher than that 670 target we just talked about. But finally, as always, we have to take a look at the graph and get a better understanding of what's been happening and how to be playing this stock moving forward. So as you guys can see, big kind of downtrend forming over the last couple of weeks. We talked about it right here, saying that we could try to maybe reestablish a longer term uptrend. However, that has broken through, and definitely the news of dilution did not help the stock whatsoever. And so we continue to kind of just trend lower, maybe curling a bit right now over the last 3 days. We see that, 450 has started to become kind of a resistance level, support level, and we are curling around there. So there is a chance that, we could completely curl back up and start trending back to the upside off this. But right now, the downtrend is definitely still intact. That being said, let's take a look at the indicators heading into tomorrow. We have about an hour and 15 minutes before close. So the first indicator that we always take a look at is going to be the VWAP, the volume weighted average price. It is represented by this yellow line right here. And as you guys can see, we are currently trending below the VWAP, meaning that more than likely the bears are going to be in control heading into tomorrow's trading session. And that will more than likely continue to be the case until we do decide to break out of that downtrend. On top of that, taking a look at moving averages, we did recently fall below the 21-day EMA. That currently sits at 496. So that kind of tells you the tail of the tape. We are now sitting in bearish territory in the short term. However, taking a look a little bit more long term, we are still sitting above the 50-day moving average and the 200-day moving average. So as you guys can see here, the 50-day sits at 367 and the 200-day sits at 293. So we are still technically sitting in bullish territory in the intermediate to longer term. And if you look intermediate to longer term, you can see that, there is still that longer term uptrend potentially intact. So that definitely is a positive sign if you are long on the stock for the long term. That being said, the last thing we need to take a look at is the RSI. This is something we talked about last week. And as you guys can see, we have made it all the way back into neutral territory. And as a result, if we do decide to break back into uptrend, there is a lot of potential here for this thing to run, just given that, we're no longer anywhere near overbought or overextended territories. So that is actually a pretty positive sign if you are long on the stock. That is something you can at least, take umbrage with, knowing that, at some point the selling has to stop. The stock is going to become oversold. So definitely keep that in mind. But finally, when it comes to the chart, let's take a look at key levels heading into tomorrow's trading session. So we're going to start on the support side. So I did mention that 450 is kind of forming as a base of a support. So I'm actually going to add that in. That's kind of going to be our first level. And like I said, if we can hold this 450, 445 level and start to curl the chart here, well, all of a sudden we could find ourselves back into an uptrend very, very soon. On top of that, we do have major support at 420 and $4. These are levels we've talked about for a long time, and AHT has respected these levels for a long time. So I do think that if we go to test them, this is actually where the buyers are going to start to really step in and try to push this thing back into an uptrend. When it comes to support levels, as always, I encourage you guys to buy near them and risk off of them. And by doing so, you're going to end up minimizing your risk and maximizing your upside. So always keep these in mind. And if you are interested in a position, these are your target zones. But now taking a look at resistance heading into tomorrow. So our first resistance zone is going to be right here at 466. If we can get above it with some volume, then I do expect us to go and retest this $5 zone. At that point, we are going to start to look a little bit more bullish. We do have resistance kind of throughout the $5, 522, 555, 570. However, at those levels, I do assume that, momentum and volume is going to start to flow back into the stock. And this thing could start to look very interesting. We could start to realize our optimistic price target of $6.70. Final thing to take a look at is the volume. And this is also going to kind of just help confirm the story here. We have seen that, volume has decreased over the last couple of weeks, where we were over 100 million shares trading hands on the daily. Now we are trending back in the wrong direction. If we do want to see another push forward, you need to watch the volume and you need to see it increase. If it continues to stay low, well, then just expect more consolidation and more downside until it really tells you otherwise. It's a great indicator to kind of predict future price action. But let me know what you guys think is going to happen next. I'm always very interested to hear your guys' feedback. If you have any questions for me, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. If you like this video, leave a thumbs up. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. And aside from that, have a great rest of your night.